Morning, everybody. It is Friday, January 26th, 2024. I'm Tom Kaczynski. Welcome to the show. I had hoped to do a Twitter Spaces, but health issues at home precluded my ability to do that. So instead, I'll do a morning review for you guys and we'll talk for a little bit. There's a lot of things to talk about, so we'll go through some of them and just some deeper thoughts I have on the situation happening here. I hope you're all doing well, and Lord's blessing be upon you all. So, I guess we have to start by talking about Texas. And, the funny thing was, especially for those of you who talk to me regularly and watch the Twitter at Tom Kaczynski, you knew I saw this coming. And it's not about an I told you so, told you so, as Ricky would say on Trailer Park Boys. But it's more about the understanding that this migration crisis, invasion, it's an invasion, it's fine, it is. It's part of a global agenda to move all people all over the place on the map, and they're doing that. And they can't do it anymore. And why they can't do it's pretty interesting. When you see people who are heavyweights like Brian Kemp of Georgia and Chris Sununu of New Hampshire signing on board to stand against the federal government, it requires a moment of pause. And some people look at that and say, hey, it's a trap, like Michael Yon, who I otherwise like a lot. But the thing about it is, sometimes people trap themselves, and I think that's part of the story of what I want to tell today. It's very easy when we look at a world where the average person has very little agency in the flow of where things are heading to think that there is a cabal running all things. And even as a theologian, you kind of think that way. And there is a tendency towards evil. I mean, the Bible talks about that in sin. But the thing that you begin to realize is that actions do have consequences, and sometimes moments overwhelm the man. And this happens over and over in history. And if you look at the elites who run these countries these days in the West, what you find is a group of people who are utterly detached and often reviled by the same people who theoretically they represent. This is a problem, and this happens historically, but we are here, and it's not a United States issue. The German farmers have been joining the Dutch and going nuts. The Poles are there, too. You probably don't even know that Paris is about to go under a blockade, and UK is talking about having a citizen conscription army, and people are up in arms about this all across the West. They're not looking at Ukraine, they're not looking at Israel or Gaza anymore. They're looking at a world where they're being asked to do things they have no interest in doing. And for the average person, the reason things have gotten along and gone along, basically since what they call it, the global war on terror, is that the American military realized after the anger had subsided after 9/11 and people started asking questions like why Building 7 was still up, and especially by the time you got to the point of bringing Obama forward, and then, what came out of the Occupy Wall Street, how it became morphed into this Marcusian race baiting sort of anger agenda of useless left wing movements that kids were led into, and that were well funded and enabled at every step of the way by elements at the top of the FBI and other agencies. You look at the relationships, James Comey, HSBC. These things are out there. But the short version is people ended up being checked out from the deal. And like China, China's an interesting thing. People ask why China didn't have their 1991 moment, why Tiananmen Square didn't. And the deal was, and this is an important deal, the Chinese central planners said, if you stick with us, we'll make you wealthy. Deng Xiaoping, to be rich is wonderful. And in America, I was telling a friend this morning, but I really believe it. What we expect is the right and ability for anyone to consume copious amounts of food, be comfortable and entertained. And that's going away from people. This inflation is at the heart of this immigration story. And they're linked, right? Because the immigration makes more demand than there is supply. And not that we don't have enough supply in America, but it's an artificially induced one, especially when money is being rerouted from the state, where you have, thousands of people being housed in these cities, where even in Maine we saw this. Veterans lost housing because they wanted to bring in illegals to take it. And I'm not attacking the illegals, by the way. By and large, I think most people who come here are just trying to get out of bad situations elsewhere, following lies that NGOs tell them. Are there people who, like that Azerbaijani Islamist guy, who are coming here who are, embedded threats for some global actors? Inevitably. And it's pretty easy for an Arab to hide as a Hispanic or a Persian or a Turk or whatever, especially if you can speak decent Spanish. What was it they call it? The Persian-Peruvian axis is very real, and I speak enough Spanish to know why they think that way, especially in places like Venezuela. Anyway, but I go through all of this because I want to talk about the social contract out of this. The social contract is that the people have certain expectations, and the elites are allowed to play their games to the extent their actions and policies enable it. So to the extent they keep a strong dollar and keep people happy and comfortable where they don't have to pay attention, that's fine. But the problem is no one can afford to not pay attention anymore. And it goes back to COVID. I mean, things before that, but COVID's important because I've always said to you on this program and all my programs that people are creatures of their habit, their culture is their cult, it's their beliefs and what they follow. And American culture is based on materialism, secularism, sin, and, consumerism, consumption. So people can't do that. Have you gone to get a Big Mac lately? Or let's say you want a real burger, a sort of real burger. You go to Big Guy, or Big Guys, Five Guys, which I haven't been to in 2 years, but it's a good burger. It's good fries. It's a nice shake. You go there and buy 2 of those, it's $35. What happens when you can't afford the lunch that takes 1 hour with 3 to 4 hours for work? After taxes and, I'm not counting expenses. The fact that rents have gone through the roof, that property can't be sold, the interest makes it unattainable for people to move. Everyone's stuck. And that's a big part of the story, too. Don't forget that. A lot of people who don't want to be where they are have no mobility because they can't afford the financing on something else. And a lot of that is trying to uphold the dollar, which is the elite's tool, really, against the individual people who want cheap currency so they can get things. Are there ideological problems in there? Of course there are. But the point isn't what the solution is for tomorrow. That's a longer conversation that will be take decades to work out if there's that much time. And given technology, there may not be. You guys know I think we're going to be fighting AI long before that. But I think that when you look at this, what you begin to realize pretty quickly is that people can't live like they used to. And they're angry about it. And why do people have revolutions? Let's talk about that for a second. Revolutions happen historically when people are hungry and people are mad and people feel neglected. All of those things are happening now in the United States of America. During COVID, a lot of you who have more means wouldn't know this, but food stamps went up. And then food stamps went down for most people about 25 to 30% after COVID, was declared over. Fine. And then food prices went up anywhere from 30 to 50%. So functionally speaking, for the poorest people in America, you took the amount of food they had access to and cut it by half in 2 years. Now, some of you have played video games. What happens when you play a game and you cut the rations to your workers by half? They get pretty restive. They get angry. And we see that happening. We see that in terms, look at the size of houses. Look at a whole bunch of different, metrics, sort of how you would look at consumption works. And it's gone. Now, for a while, this had been going on as a slow drip for generations. You can go back and look at what's 1960, you could work for a year, buy a house, get a wife, and go to college. Pretty close to that, actually. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And, there's an argument that has some validity to it. It says, take feminism. That you had people where now you had 2 people working, so you doubled the labor supply. Didn't necessarily increase demand. It was the same amount of people. And then you had people working twice as much and making half as much individually, or a little bit more than that. So they felt like they were making more. But functionally, the individual worker went back because the social contract back then was one man would go to work, he'd come home, he'd have a wife, he'd have kids, the society would support him. Very classical model. Completely gone now. Now we can't even agree on what a boy and a girl are. But people did believe in the idea of working hard to make money and get by, and that was the American fixation. And it broke for a couple reasons. It broke because for the boomers, all they did was spend all their inheritance, and now they're throwing all the money back in there. For the Zoomers, no matter how much they work, they have no chance of attaining real capital because all their money's going into debt servicing or into daily living expenses, right? And for the people who were in between, who were working really, really hard for a long time, COVID shut everything down and the state took care of them and things seemed to work okay enough. I mean, it was dystopic in other ways, especially if you were like me, and I know most of you were, and you stood outside the system. You lost your job. Your job was taken from you for non-compliance, which, by the way, at the back of this, we've never made peace with. There was never an apology. Not from Biden, not from Trump. There's probably about 50 to 100 million Americans who are owed a desperate apology. Frankly, they have a better claim on reparations because what was done to them a couple years ago, not 20 generations ago. But none of that happened. And so people were working harder and then they checked out. And did they check out for different reasons? Sure. The incels checked out for NPNW, look up what it means, But the idea was, the old bargain was you work to get a wife and now you don't get one. because women make all the money because they get hired. And they're unhappy. They have cats. And the state, like it wanted all the way back to Plato and the Republic, wants to be in control of the children. They want to be in charge of the schools. And all of this has come to a head. 10 years from now, if nothing had changed, we would be in an automated society where people would be poor, working for credits that would look like something out of Aldous Huxley. But you can't break something without having something to cover the gap, and they can't cover the gap. They want a war to cover the gap, because then people are distracted, they die, and there's time. But the war has come, and it's interesting. It is not the war of the Russians versus the Americans, or the Americans versus the Arabs, or NATO versus the East, or even against China, because China has the same damn problem. It's the war of people who are connected through global communications, who are dissatisfied with a declining standard of living, who look at their own oligarchs and say, wait a minute, you did this to us. We hate you. And we'll use the United States since that's where things are hot today, but the same basic principle applies for most of the West, right? Forgive me as I keep moving, I'm such a fidget. We've reached a point now where, for some years, the understanding was the United States has a very large police state. It does things abroad, but it does things domestically, too. And I'll just say this. Any dissidents who ever got together to try to organize anything, even just to talk or have a completely peaceful, novel alternative, were instantly subverted, and they were, destroyed in the press. They were destroyed because activists were allowed. Activists who went and literally, in the cases of Portland and other places, went and attacked, firebombed federal agents. And people kept following the paycheck, just like those Border Patrol workers. I feel bad for them. Kind of. And then other times I'm like, well, you picked a side. And it's not too late to change sides. It's never too late to change sides. Well, maybe for Benedict Arnold it was. But we're getting to the point where there are sides in this. And I want to be out of here. You all know that. I'm going to Argentina. That's the plan. Mainly because I don't want to get involved in it. I mean, I have ideas, don't we all? To talk about that. Maybe I will. I have some ideas for how you could fix the American problem in theory. From a structural perspective, but you can't from a moral perspective, because consumption and vice are what we do. I've talked about that, and you understand that, and something will have to replace that because it's not sustainable. It will expend wealth, and it will make someone comfortable, but it will destroy wealth of a country within 2 or 3 generations, and we're kind of at that point. There's still some pretty pieces to be looted, but that's where we're at. So, in the United States, we are now in a spot where people feel like they have nothing to lose. And for a lot of people, they look at this not in terms of a year from now or 2 years from now. Say you're a white guy like me. DEI means you're never going to get hired. You're never going to get promoted. You're going to be expected to do 10 times as much work for nothing because of people who have a historical grievance against you and who are not going to let it go because, frankly, it's easier for them than having to take accountability for themselves. America worked when people had a meritocracy. America worked when it had the sort of people who could understand and work a meritocracy. Immigration destroyed that. Inflation has blown out the ladders to advancement because people are already working twice as much as they used to make half as much. You can't ask more of them. And at some point, they're saying, you know what, I can't keep up with this. You have stuff, I'm going to take it. The migrants are already saying that. BLM in the cities are saying that. But now, the impoverished middle classes and the rentier class and the people who did things, they're starting to say it. Their small business who got shut down during COVID, who got priced out of the market, and now they have a debt and they're upside down in their credit. What's that guy thinking? When he lost agency and he sees these other corporate groups going around, what do you think? I mention this in light of Texas because it's a powder keg. And if the federal government is foolish enough to send armed troops to try to displace the Texans or whoever else are down there, because citizens are going to come down there and they're going to stand. And quite frankly, there'll be foreign provocateurs, no doubt. It's too convenient. And people say, oh, well, it's a psyop. Maybe, but they've lost control over it. And that's what you have to understand. This thing is hot. And you could say there's an arsonist. But there are plenty of times an arsonist tries to set a small fire and the whole damn forest goes up. I think we're at that point, maybe. Biden's political future requires him to do things that are destructive of this country's survival. The best thing to happen, to be honest, if cooler heads could prevail, it would be if you let Texas have its wall, let the election settle this, and then go a different direction. And the country holds. It has problems, but it holds. And people get their moral victory. But there's been nothing in the history of this administration or the people behind it, looking at you, Obama, looking at the people who were building that up, Frankfurt School, Marxists, communists, occultists. It's a dark web the globalists have weaved. Because they thought they could have a global management class, they would run the people, but they didn't pay off the people enough. They could have gotten away with it, by the way. I believe that. They were. But they got greedy and they got impatient. Why they did that, that's a longer conversation. I only try to go 20 minutes these days. I'm not going to spend 30 minutes going through that today. Maybe another day. I'd like to do a live show, but it's hard to do since I can't do it on my phone anymore. Otherwise, I would. Blame YouTube. But a lot of people are getting shut down, and let's be honest, they've shut me down on other channels before. That's going to happen again. Bible says, I think, if I remember the verse right, choose this day whom you will serve. Always pick the Lord's side. Always pick the side of virtue. But it applies to day-to-day life, too. And you may have to pick a side. And you can try to stay out of the way. It's fine. I live in northern Maine, and I'm contending for Latin America. I think that way. But after a while, it's a social exercise. And you're going to need friends. And you're going to need something to stand for. And you're going to need something to believe. And what we have is not it. What we have is broken beyond repair. So there's going to be something new. So let's go through the play-by-play of what might happen. Because I've been thinking about it a lot. And I'm surprised that all the Republican governors came together on this, especially some real weak people like Brian Kemp in Georgia or Sununu in New Hampshire. There's some people in there who are not very good governors. Even Mike DeWine, terrible governors. And yet, they came in on it. What expands this, just like it did in the Civil War, just like Lincoln did, actually, with Fort Sumter, is if the feds throw a match in there. And we were told, if you believe X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, that Biden told the Texans that they have till today, Friday, to get out of the way so they can remove that wire. And it's such a small thing, really. It doesn't make any difference in the big scheme of the immigration, but it's a symbol. Symbols matter. It's the symbolism of saying not 1 inch further, you sons of bitches. And for those convoys that are starting to head down there, for the people in the Yellow Jackets in Paris, for the people in Germany who had the industrial economy of the world and are being destroyed, for the farmers in the Netherlands, for the blokes in the UK who literally can have someone visit their house because they post something on the internet and use something stronger than a plastic knife. All of those people who've been told for 30 years that their country was a disaster and that they were to blame for it and that they needed to be replaced and changed and re-educated. They've had enough. And they can see there's no future where the globalists are leading. And they're starting to backtrack. Jamie Dimon was out there talking about it. But it's too late. It's always been too late. And you know what? Maybe during Trump. I don't know. But Trump's one of them. Maybe he's a traitor's class. Maybe he's not. I don't know. I don't care. It's bigger than him, although he's latching on. And he may serve as a symbol. Wisely or foolishly. It doesn't matter. This is the flow of time and men, and this is the moment where the fight could happen. You could see the events circling around, and I think it's ironic. I think it's really ironic, actually. I think they have the Nevada caucus soon here, and then South Carolina, where it all started last time. The South has come together again. Don't let the fact that Kentucky and North Carolina's governors are Democrats, that will not stop those states from joining again with them, nor will Kansas stay aside from that. And, I'm a northerner, so what up here? We're just going to watch. You're not going to have volunteer militias marching down from Maine and Massachusetts, When you go to Little Round Top, there ain't going to be anyone there to stop you. And the feds, the moment it gets funny, I know some of these guys. Some of these guys are good guys. They're going to go home, take care of their family, and you know what? They're going to take care of the community. And the ones who stay, and the ones they bring in, because they'll have to bring them in, are going to be mercenaries and hired guns who are going to do the sort of things that mercenaries and hired guns who have no loyalty do. They'll do terroristic tactics, and people will hate them. Think Ceausescu, something like that. So that's where we are in the story. Will the Fed send forces down? I hope not. That'll lead to a war. Will the states give control over their militias to their state guards or national guards to the federal government? Even if they wanted to, the people wouldn't go. You know, there's rumors circling around all over the place. You hear places like Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell, Fort Bliss. We're not going to fight for this president. And you'd think somebody has to have control over him. Or maybe it's just a bunch of insane neocons like Blinken and his ilk. Maybe they're really that focused on Gaza because that's their people. And I don't know. I know this. It could get hot fast, and when that happens and the dollar breaks, because that's the thing. Amazingly, despite this chaos, the dollar is rising against most things in the foreign market because the banks are just making it. They're destroying the wealth of the American people to keep the American dollar afloat in the idea that they can come out the other side of this with fewer people. You know, a lot of people getting sick, a lot of turbo cancers. What do you think's in the jab? And moreover, what do you think's in the jabs that people are still getting? That every time you're not someone who's jabbed, you go to a doctor, oh wait, you get sick. My wife's dealing with that right now. Say a prayer for her. But this is the reality of what we're facing now. Now, it's not well organized. I'll be the first to tell you that. But it's passionate. And passion plays matter. This could go a lot of different ways. You know, if you want to do the history, the war between the parliamentarians that led to Cromwell, the death of Charles I, 30 Years' War. Need to study that a little bit. Take a look. I think that's very, very valid here. I could go French Revolution-y, but I don't think so. It doesn't feel like that. And people like the American example. So look at Fort Sumter. Look at Concord and Lexington. Look at these events. And when it doesn't happen, the nullification crisis, bleeding Kansas, people... But ultimately, the people with the highest agency left, whose futures are being denied, do not have a political solution. So when there's no political solution, the state loses the monopoly on violence. We've already kind of seen that. Private mercenary armies fighting wars abroad. Private security forces, while laws are made to limit what guns you have. Efforts to pass bills now in the House to limit what a militia can be. And the Supreme Court, man. You have a diversity hire. You hired a woman. I mean, look at that. Look at the court. I mean, let's be honest. You know, the thing that all 5 of those people who voted against this have in common is that they're all interested in men. And you know what I mean by that. I'll say it that way. Maybe get past the censor that way. Looking at you, Chief. You know, you sort of wonder if the people who say, you know, the Epstein list, you know, it seemed like at least the globalists had everyone under control. But now people are scattering like rats. And I don't know what happens next. I really don't. But here's my advice, especially if you're a northerner. Stay out of the way as best you can. Eventually, something will have to be done. But you know what? I think it would be interesting to see what will happen when D.C. has to resort to naked force, and they will, eventually, and the people don't take it and they stand against them. Who will stand beside those people? Because they're going to flee, but where are they going to flee to? They're not wanted anywhere. They're really not. New Zealand? The new Mordor, right? I don't know. Maybe that's why they're building these bunkers. Or maybe something big's coming and they don't care. Don't look up, right? I don't know. Excuse me. It's a crazy year. And it's crazier than the election. It's a fundamental year. Now, to the United States. You can't fix this politically. Because you need a cultural revolution in the sense of return to nature, return to hierarchy, meritocracy based on talent and skill. And frankly, you can't take in every third world war with an IQ of 85. You can absorb a certain amount of people. You know, I know a lot of ethno-nationalists. You're not supposed to talk about that. I'll tell you. The United States ran on an 85-15 basis from basically 1790 to 1960. It's the truth. It's sustainable. There are pros, there are cons. You can do less, but you can't really do too much more. It just doesn't work. Canada's proof of that. Look what's happening over there. Actually, if you want to be amused, watch what Tucker was saying up there. But, so things will have to change. And if things get funny, people in the cities will die first. because they are not producers, they do not have assets, and their resources and logistics will be shut off. You want to see what the U.S. looks like? Look at the map of voting by county. And actually, I'd say look at the 2016 map. I think it's more honest than the 2020 map because that election was too fixed. Not that there wasn't cheating in 2016, but you know what it is. It's blue dots in a red sea. And the suburbs are going to be the most scared people in a lot of ways. So you'll have cordon sanitaires of, you know, of a guy with 2.4 kids, a job he hates, a wife who's a shrew oftentimes, who say, you're not going to take my property. And the rural folk, try to keep out of the way. Or if the government really gets nasty, okay, take away infrastructure and make you defend your people. That's a chaotic scenario. I don't want to think about that. It would be good if localities, even smaller than that, could come together to make something happen. If you wanted to fix the U.S., you know, I wrote about it in New Albion 1. You need local representation. Democracy's fine at the local level, but it doesn't scale up. You need the ability for people to form new polities. When Portland becomes insane in Oregon, the rest of the state shouldn't be dragged down with it. They want to have a crazy free state in the city of Portland? Fine. It's not fine, but you should be able to insulate them, and people should not be dragged along by mass consent. The tyranny of the majority. But the tyranny of just raw numbers, especially when you start giving voting to people who have no right to be here, who are illegal to begin with. And they say, this is terrible, people are standing against the federal government and immigration rights. Really? When did you go after all those sanctuary cities where they literally are letting people vote, they let them work, they let them have ID cards? How many hypocrisies are people supposed to overlook? You can't do it anymore, can you? And you can't even afford to do it because you say, oh, at least I can just live my life, because now it's reached the point where you can't live your life because of these people. You know, they had a shooter up in Maine a few months ago. People don't talk about that anymore. It's thought about. Not that he was necessarily of that persuasion, but people think about it. Safety is gone. Prosperity is gone. A promise of a war against the Russians? What did Russia ever do to me? Why does Russia keep fighting America? Could it be because we were the two Christian ends of Western white civilization that some people at the heart of it didn't like? Maybe. The noticing has happened. And as much as elites, even the people they pick to be the front headers, look at this. The people at the bottom know. All of us dissidents who were out there looking for nothing but the truth did our job. So you can't go back to your lies. Because it isn't worth believing them. The emperor has no clothes only works when living in the empire is a benefit. And that's quickly changing. I'm going to watch it. You know, I hope to get out before it's done, before it starts. This may go fast, this may go slow. This week will be telling, though. People are going to go down there ready to stand against anything, to the point of almost being reckless. So, if the Fed send anyone down there, I am under the presumption that this is going to get hot. And then, pray. Keep your family close. If you have the ability to be near someone who you care about, who you trust, in a community you feel safer, it's a good time for strategic retreat. Make sure you have what you need on hand. Food, water, you know, all that stuff. People are oblivious. You know, I go on Twitter, and the top trending things are still being pushed out, like wrestling and sports. And okay, normies don't know. They don't have to know. We don't need their consent. We don't need their belief. We don't need their understanding. We don't need them. Sorry. It's horrible. If you're an NPC, your time's done. Now the plot changes. Where does it go from here? I don't know. I'm not, and by the way, I'm just analyzing. I'm not advocating. I'm telling you what's going to happen and why. Like I've been doing. Like the feds have been, you know, ignoring for years. Or blaming on the wrong people. They attacked the people who sustained this country and enabled the people who destroyed it. It's not too late. Biden can issue terrible orders. Political hacks can issue terrible orders. People don't have to follow them. That's how the Soviet Union fell. You know, the apparatchiks went in there in 1991 and said, hey, we want you to fire on Yeltsin. And they wouldn't do it. The Chinese did. That's why they want the Chinese people all around the world. See how that works? Americans, it's up to you. But as the movie trailer for that new flick says, tellingly, what kind of Americans are you? And if you're the kind who are just off the boat, who only want to be here to get a big paycheck and don't give a damn about this country, that the government's been bringing in with the idea they're going to turn into a military force, that the political commissars have run everyone else out of the military, hopefully they took some stuff with them. Okay, that's where we are. We'll talk more. That's enough for one video. God bless all of you. Have a good day. Follow the Twitter at Tom Kaczynski. If you want to reach out to me just to keep base, add Telegram at Tom Kaczynski there as well. The Venmo CVCPRV. If you want to help, be appreciated. Say a prayer for the wife. Dana hasn't been feeling well. I'm not feeling really well either, and I got to move a ton of logs today. I'm not looking forward to it, but hey, that's the thing about living in Maine. Winter keeps coming. And if you want to touch base. I'm here. All right. God bless. Heavenly Father, I just pray that your wisdom went out and that your will be done. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen.